Well, good morning. It's a great joy to be with you and share today. As Rick just shared with you, Watchman Fellowship, what we do is we're an apologetics ministry, but focusing not just on understanding other religions and other faiths, but having a reason for the hope that is in us and to be able to give Christians the tools and resources they need to be able to build a bridge, to be able to reach out and effectively share the gospel with people of other faiths and other religions. And we've got some great tools to help in that area. I just want to call your attention to some. On the back of the outline that you just received, there's a list of some of the resources we have at the resource table, but one of them is our free profiles. Every other month, our ministry's been shipping out these 4-page profiles, and we've been doing that for over 20 years, and every other month we deal with a different controversial doctrine or new religious movement, and we have available the entire profile notebook, which is every profile we've ever done for over 20 years, over 400 pages, 450 pages, but I'm most excited that we have something for you for free. Now, through our partnership with the Baptist Convention of New Mexico, we last year provided for our pastors a digital edition, absolutely free, of this $49 notebook. But today, I'm excited to announce we're expanding that to any Southern Baptist in New Mexico. You can get that entire notebook for free. Have a little card available at our resource table with a special link for New Mexican Baptists. And what this does, it gives you where you can download and put this on your phone or tablet. I've got a little video. I'm really excited about this to show you how this would work and how you can get the most use out of it. A little 3-minute video. Let's watch this clip. It's a silent movie, but I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and skip that video, but what we're going to do on that is basically allow you to download that. There's instructions for how to put it on your smartphone, tablet, on your computer. I love the paper notebook. I'm a paper kind of guy. The problem with that big notebook is I never have it when I need it, but I seem to always have my phone. And there's a little tap to email where you can send any profile to the person that you're talking to that needs that information. I think you're really going to enjoy that. Now, this morning, what I want to talk about is I have a message entitled The 4 Views. The 4 Views, and it's the key to sharing Christ with other faiths. The 4 Views. Now, I'd like you to know everything about all the religions, and I think it's important. You want to be able, the more information you have, the better you're able to communicate with someone of another faith. But I think sometimes we make this too complicated. And sometimes we might feel like, well, we can't really talk to that person. We can't talk to that atheist. We can't really talk to that Muslim. We really can't talk to that Jehovah's Witness because we don't know everything about that religion. My job this morning is I'm going to simplify. Now, what I'm going to share with you, I believe that if you know the 4 views, what I'm about to share with you, if you can just master the 4 views, you are prepared to share the gospel. You don't need to know everything about every religion. You're prepared to what I would call solo. Now, solo means to go on your own. Do we have any pilots here? I'm not a pilot myself, but I spent many years in the right seat of private planes over the years. And what a solo is when a pilot for the very first time takes off, flies the plane, and lands completely by himself, by herself, alone. That's called soloing. Now, I used to think that when you soloed, that meant that you were a licensed pilot. Well, that person's solo. They're a licensed pilot. They know everything they need. Come to find out, you solo very early in the training of a pilot. And basically, the only thing you've learned so far when you solo is how to get that airplane lined up on the runway, to go full throttle, pull the stick back, to make the pattern, line up on the approach, to somehow get that airplane back on the runway. And they say any landing that you can walk away from is a good landing. I'm going to give you everything you need in these next few minutes to solo. I don't care who you're talking to, what religion. If you know the 4 worldviews, you're going to be ready to solo on that. Turn in your Bibles, if you will, to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. The Bible tells us this. But honor the Messiah as Lord in your hearts. Always be ready to give a defense. Now that's the word apologia. That's the word to give an answer, to give a reason, to make a defense, it says. To whom? To anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. We need to be prepared to talk to not just people who share our belief. Maybe you want to talk to somebody who doesn't even believe the Bible, or perhaps doesn't even believe that there's a God. But the Bible tells us we need to be ready for whom? For anyone. And it says, for the reason for the hope that is in you. However, do this with gentleness and respect. So the attitude that we need to have is one of the respect of that person in a friendly way, not to bash or attack. Well, we're going to do that with the four views. If you look at your outline, the first worldview is called monotheism. That's the first worldview, monotheism. And monotheism is based on two Greek terms or words, mono and theos. The word theos means God, and the word mono means one. So all the monotheists in the world are going to believe the same thing. There's only one true God. Now, anytime you say there's only one true God, that would make any other God what? A false God. So one true God, any other God is a false God. Well, what I want to do is button some buttons on these worldviews. See, doctrine or worldviews works a lot like buttoning your buttons. Have you ever done this before? You get up in the morning, you're in a hurry, and you button the first button incorrectly. Now, is this just a Texas thing? Help me out here. Now, have you ever? Okay, thank you. I feel a little better. I'm not the only one. Now, when you button the first button incorrectly, what happens to the rest of your buttons? Yeah, if you're halfway consistent, now some of you may be all over the map, but for most people, however you button the first button is going to determine the rest of your buttons. That's how worldviews work. And once you say there's only one God, you tend to button the buttons the same way, regardless of what religion it is. So let's button the buttons, the four buttons I want to talk about. Monotheists believe that God, button number one, God is eternal and personal. Monotheists believe that God has always been God. When did God get to be God? Well, if you're monotheist, you're going to believe that God has always been God. But very importantly, God is also personal. Now, this is important because it implies that we can have a relationship, that we can communicate with God. God is not an it or God is personal. And it also implies that we can sin and that there may be a day of judgment because we might one day stand before a personal God. Matter, everything in the universe, matter is created by God. God spoke the universe into existence out of nothing. All monotheists believe this. Humanity, monotheists believe that humans are less than God. You say, well, James, all religions believe this. No, now don't get ahead. Believe it or not all religions believe this. And the fourth button of monotheism, salvation is of God. For most monotheistic religions, salvation is something that is done by God or controlled by God. So on the next part of your outline here, there are three major world religions that fall in the broad category of monotheism. First would be Christianity. I hope all of us are monotheists because that is the worldview of Christianity. A second example would be Judaism. And a third example would be Islam. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Muslims believe in the same God as the God we believe in. Allah of Quran is not the same God as Yahweh of the Bible. However, they do believe in one God. This gives them some common ground. And we know some buttons that we can talk about with any monotheist. Let me talk about how this might work out in an actual witnessing situation. Knowing the basics, let's talk about when it comes to trying to talk to a Muslim. You know they're monotheistic. You know the buttons. How would a discussion go? Let me give you an example. One of the occupational hazards for anyone who's in full-time ministry, and it's true to some degree of every Christian. Let me tell you, if we are not careful, we will isolate ourselves from the world, and it's like all the time we're only dealing with Christians. You're dealing with your church, you're dealing with your leaders, you're dealing with your staff, and you have very little time to actually interact with non-believers, with non-Christians. Kai Bowman reminded us last night in his message that the harvest begins when? When you lift up your eyes, Jesus said, and look out into the fields. Well, sometimes we never lift our eyes up. We never have any relationship. I knew this was a problem for me. A number of years ago, I realized that I was spending all my time around Christians and not really interacting very much. And so what I decided to do, there's different ways you can do it. You get involved with PTA. You can coach a league softball, but something that gets you out with people who are not members of your church, not Christian. And so what I did, I decided one thing I was going to do is do most of my reading at the Starbucks. Now, rather than not my office, not at the house, I have 3 Starbucks between my office and my house. And I will, kind of give equal time. And so I'll go there. Let me say, a lot of times I'll sit there and just read for 2 or 3 weeks and not really have a real good conversation with anybody. I just get my reading done. But I cannot tell you how many fantastic conversations have started. And there's different ways to do it. You can read a Bible. And that's going to attract people. You'd be surprised. People come up, are you a minister? Could you pray for me about something? They see you read a Bible. But you know what I've noticed? It also scares people off sometimes. So I'll sometimes go back to my iPad. They won't be scared of me if they don't see the Bible. But it's amazing. I was in Starbucks closest to my office, which is right next to UTA, University of Texas, Arlington. There's quite a few Muslim students there. So I was reading my iPad, I was reading the Bible on my iPad, and I noticed this customer come in Starbucks, and I'd seen him before, and he looked a little international, but I couldn't really tell for sure, but I noticed something different about him. He had an Islamic dictionary in his hand, and I thought, okay, I know now, this guy's Muslim. I also noticed something else very quickly. There was only one open seat in that Starbucks right next to me. So I think, this is God. So what I did, on this one, I did kind of cheat a little bit. I cheated. What I did is I was reading the Bible, but I tap, closed the Bible, opened the Quran, began to read the Quran. Didn't say a thing. I just read. But sure enough, after he sat down with his coffee, about 2 or 3 minutes later, he must have looked over my shoulder because he tapped me. He goes, Quran. I said, yes. And he said, oh, you're Muslim. I said, no, I'm Christian. He said, huh? And I said, I'm reading the Quran. He said, why? I said, well, there's some things in the Quran that I'm struggling with, trying to understand. I'm not Muslim. And he said, I'm Muslim. I will help you. What would you like to know? And I said, I'm reading here in the Quran in Surah, in chapter 3, verse 50. And it says this in the Quran. I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. This is Jesus speaking. Jesus said, I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. So fear Allah and obey me. He said, yes, you must fear Allah and obey Isa, obey Jesus. And I said, well, here's my question. In reading the Quran, nowhere can I find a list of the commands of Jesus. How can we obey Jesus if we don't know his commands? And he gave me a quizzical look and he said, let me see that. And he takes the iPad out of my hands and he begins to look. And after a few minutes, he says, I cannot find this either. He said, but I have friends who are Quranic scholars. I will find for you in the Quran the list of the commands of Jesus, and the next time I see you, I will give you the list. I said, thank you. That's the kind of help I need. So I didn't see him for maybe another week or 7 or 8 days, but I noticed he came back in and we started talking about some other things. And then I reminded him, I said, you were going to help me find the list of the commands of Jesus in the Quran. You had some friends who were scholars. He goes, oh, my friend, they could not find them either. And I said, I've been thinking about that. And I'm thinking maybe the only place you could find the commands of Jesus that I'm aware of would have to be the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Where else could you find them? He said, oh, the Gospels have been corrupted. I said, but where else can you find that? And I said, let me ask you, have you ever read the Gospels? He said, they're not in my language. I said, really? Not in your language? Well, he said, I'm from Pakistan. I said, I would imagine they probably are in your language. And I took my iPad and I just did a little Google search. And sure enough, pulled up and showed him. And he'd never seen it. He's looking at that. And I said, let me ask you something. Would you be willing to read the Gospel of Matthew in your language if I gave you a printed copy? Would you read? And he looked at me kind of hesitant. Whoa. He says, no. You must do something for me. You must read Surah 2 and Surah, I think it was 22, 25, something like that. He gave me 2 chapters from the Quran. You must read that, then I will read Matthew. I said, deal, let's do it. And so I came back and brought him a printed copy of the Gospel of Matthew. And you see him right here in the Starbucks for the very first time reading the Gospel of Matthew in Urdu, his own heart language. Now, this opened the door for all other kinds of conversations. Because knowing that he's monotheistic, he knows there's a personal God he must stand before. Every Muslim believes in the judgment day, just like Christians do. There's going to be a day of judgment. And so I asked him as we were talking later in another conversation, about a week later, I said, let me ask you, do you believe in the day of judgment? I knew he would. He said, yes, the judgment day. I said, when you stand before God, what determines whether or not you're going to go to paradise or to hell? He said, well, there's a scale of justice, and your good deeds must outweigh your bad deeds. And so I say, the good deeds, I mean like the pillars? And he said, yes, like the 5 pillars. And I said, well, let me ask you, have you performed Hajj? Have you done the pilgrimage to Mecca? He goes, no, I've not been able to do that. I said, oh, but you do the 5 daily prayers, right? The 5 daily. He said, well, not every day. And then I said, well, you do zakat. You do the offering. You do the gifts to those in needs. He said, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And he looked at me and said, actually, I'm not a very good Muslim. I said, I know exactly how you feel. A lot of times I don't feel like a very good Christian. Let me ask you, do you know for sure when you stand before God, will your good deeds outweigh your bad? I had the same struggle, and I realized I needed help. I could not get there on my own. I needed a Savior. And it gets into a great conversation. All you really need to know is the basic buttons of monotheism, and you'll have some very good questions, talking points to engage and start that conversation. So that's the worldview monotheism. The second worldview is atheism. Atheism. And of course, we have the word theos, which means God. In Greek, if you put an alpha, an A in front of a noun, it negates it. So an atheist, of course, is going to believe in no God. And let's button the buttons very quickly that go with that. God, there is none. They're non-existent. No God. Matter. The atheist will believe that matter is all that there is. The cosmos, the universe, is all that ever was, all that ever will be. Matter is all that there is. Well, if matter is all that there is, what is the highest form of matter that we know of? Well, the highest form of matter would have to be humans. Now, there may be some extraterrestrial out there we've not met yet, more highly evolved or superior to human life. But as far as we know right now, humans are the highest form of matter. So you could argue, in a sense, there is an ultimate source. There is a God of atheism. That God is man. This is the foundation of humanism. And in fact, you could even argue that they even go so far as to believe the Trinity, because some atheists do believe in the Trinity, me, myself, and I. But let's button the buttons here. Matter is all that there is. Humanity is the highest form of matter, and salvation is unnecessary. Humanist manifesto, we do not need a deity to save us. We can save ourselves. 3 religions that fall in this category. Let me say, these are religions that have all the trappings and all the characteristics of any other faith. In fact, it takes a lot of faith to believe these religions, I'm convinced. First example would be secular humanism. Second example, philosophical Marxism is based on the atheist worldview. And the third example, surprisingly, would be Satanism. A lot of people think that Satanists worship Satan as God. But interestingly, most Satanists, Colonel Michael Aquino of the Church, the Temple of Set, Anton LaVey, the author of the Satanic Bible, neither man believed in Satan. This was just a symbol, and ultimately they were the source. Thelemic magic, the idea that you get your own desires and wills by the power of magic. So most forms of Satanism would also be from the worldview. But there's a growing revival of atheism, which was seeming to almost die out in our country. But there's been some 4 horsemen of what's known as the new atheist movement. You have New York Times best-selling authors like Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, Daniel Dennett, Breaking the Spell, Sam Harris, The End of Faith, and the late Christopher Hitchens, who wrote the book God Is Not Great. Now, these books are very influential. They're New York Times bestsellers. And what used to be maybe only debated in the philosophy departments of certain universities, now, these books are on the high school campuses now. And so we have to, it's essential that we as Christians begin to think, how are we going to interact with some of the arguments of these new atheists, like the Richard Dawkins. Now, again, you don't have to know everything to be able to have a conversation with an atheist. And it's interesting, when you start a dialogue with atheists, you sometimes find out that many atheists are actually agnostic. Now, again, let me share with you how this might work in a witnessing encounter. I was at a different Starbucks, and I was reading my iPad, and it happened to be the new one that just came out at that time, and I was reading it, and a guy noticed and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, that's the new one, isn't it? I said, yeah. He said, I was thinking about getting one. Well, wow, it's thin. It's pretty cool. And I said, yeah, I really like it a lot. We were really hitting it off. And then he said, well, what are you reading? I said, I'm reading the Bible. And man, it was like I had thrown a cold bucket of water on him. Oh, the Bible. Well, and he didn't. I could tell that conversation was pretty much over. I said, have you ever read the Bible? He said, well, I'm an atheist. I said, really? I said, I don't get to really talk with a lot of atheists. He said, well, there's a lot of us. I said, well, I'm not saying that. I never get to really sit down and talk with very many atheists. He said, well, you're talking to me. So let me ask you something about atheism for a moment. About you. Would you describe yourself as an open-minded atheist, or would you say that you were a closed-minded atheist? Again, a great way to start a conversation. Would you consider yourself to be open-minded or closed-minded atheist? He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, maybe I could show you this napkin. I took a regular Starbucks napkin. And you can do the same thing. I'm going to show you how to do it. I said, let me tell you what I mean, open or closed-minded. I took that Starbucks napkin, and on the top of the napkin, I wrote, all the knowledge in the universe. I said, what if on this Starbucks napkin was all the knowledge and information, data, in the entire universe? Would you be so kind as to draw a circle around how much of that knowledge you have? He said, I don't understand what you're saying. So I said, well, let me put myself, for example. If that's the entire knowledge of all the universe, I drew a tiny dot right in the middle of the napkin. I only possess this much of the knowledge, a tiny dot of all the knowledge out there. He said, I see what you're saying. So he said, my knowledge, and he drew a circle around my dot, bigger. Which is fine. That was, I'm okay with that. But my point was this: he didn't draw the circle around the entire napkin. Now, if he had, I would argue maybe he does have a God right here in the Starbucks who knows all things. But most atheists are going to acknowledge they don't have all the knowledge in the universe. I said, well, then let me ask you something, open or closed-minded. I drew a little X out to the side of the circle. I said, is it theoretically possible, I'll put God, that God does exist somewhere in the universe, but he exists outside of your circle of knowledge? Now, he's already said he doesn't have all knowledge. Is it possible that in that unknown knowledge out there, that there really is a God? He just hasn't put that in the circle yet. He said, well, I don't believe in God. That's why I know that. But I said, is it possible? He said, well, he has a choice. He either has to say he knows all things, or it is possible. And so he said, well, theoretically, I guess anything's possible. I said, well, if you think it's even a remote possibility, I would say maybe you could be better described as an agnostic rather than an atheist. He said, what do you mean? I said, because you think it might be possible that there's a God out there. So I put on the bottom of the napkin, congratulations, you are now an agnostic. Now, I did not draw the smiley face. I do not recommend that. Anyway, so he says, well, we talked about it a little bit. So he finally said, okay, I guess technically you could argue I'm an agnostic. I said, well, that's very fascinating now, because now I have a more important question. He said, what? I said, would you consider yourself to be an open-minded agnostic or a closed-minded agnostic? Now, this particular guy, he was a computer science professor at UTA. He didn't want to talk anymore. But other people I've talked to, this was how I would carry the conversation further. What do you mean open-minded or closed-minded agnostic? And I'll say this. I say, here's the question, one question that's going to tell me, are you closed-minded or open-minded? Here's my question. If God did exist somewhere outside your circle of knowledge, would you rather know or would you rather not know? Now, that's a fascinating question. See, you're confronted with the reality. Some would rather not know. And occasionally I get the answer, I would rather not know. See, it's a matter of the will at this point. It's not knowledge, it's a problem with the will. I would define that as a closed-minded agnostic. But if someone says, yes, if there was a God, sure I would want to know that there's a God. And then I'll say, great, I would define you as an open-minded agnostic. And here's my question. If it's possible that God exists somewhere outside of your circle, have you ever tried to make contact? What do you mean? Well, it's interesting. It was just last year Tom Pearson died. Tom Pearson was the founder of SETI. Now, SETI is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI. And what happens is that in SETI is, you may have seen those arrays of satellite antennas that are pointed out. Millions and millions of dollars, first by NASA, now it's privately funded. Over 100 scientists and support staff are making every effort possible, because if there is intelligent life out there who might be trying to send a signal, it's worth every penny to them to try to pick up that signal and decode it and know there's life out there. Then I'll ask the question, have you ever tried to make contact? You're not going to have to build a satellite antenna. You're not going to have to spend millions. All you have to do is pray and say, God, if you're out there, would you make yourself real to me? Let me tell you about a conversation like this. Oftentimes, I'm not getting into deep theological arguments, philosophical arguments. I'm not talking about the cosmological argument for the existence of God or getting into the philosophy. Sometimes I'll do, but it's usually just trying to get people to think outside the box. And maybe you have an agnostic or maybe an atheist who now realizes maybe she's more agnostic than atheist, or he is more agnostic, who for the very first time is thinking, maybe I haven't ever tried to make contact. And this kind of thing is how we interact and engage with our culture. And you can do this just knowing the four worldviews. Now, the third worldview is called polytheism. The plot thickens. You have theos, which means God. Poly means many or more than one. Anytime you're talking with somebody and they talk about the gods, you might not know everything they believe, but you know they fall in this category. So buttoning the buttons, God, there's more than one, true God. Matter is eternal. The polytheists will believe that matter has always existed. Before the gods were even gods, matter is eternal. Humanity, most of the polytheistic religions have legends and sagas and stories about certain humans joining the ranks of the deity. So men and women perhaps can gain godhood at some point, become a goddess or a god. And salvation, virtually always in polytheistic religions, salvation is based on works and ritual. You must appease these gods through your worship and good works. So three religions that fall in that category. Greek mythology would be number one, the belief in the gods and goddesses. In fact, interestingly, this was the overall pervasive worldview of the first century. This is what Paul went up against in Ephesus when they cried out at the amphitheater, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." This is the Artemis cult. The belief in the different gods and goddesses. So the first century Christians especially had to deal with this worldview. Greek and you have the pantheon of gods and goddesses that live on Mount Olympus, Zeus and Hermes and Aphrodite, the different gods and goddesses. Second example would be the ancient Egyptian religion, the mortuary religions of Egypt. So you have the different gods and goddesses of the pharaohs, and you have Ra, the sun god, and you have all the different deities. This is part of the polytheistic worldview. But a third kind of surprising example of polytheism would be Mormonism. I was born and raised a Mormon, fourth generation. A couple of years ago, I kind of shared my story with you from Mormonism to Christianity. As a Mormon, I was taught that God, before he was God, he was once a man, that he's married. And I was taught that if I was a good Mormon, eventually I could become a God myself one day of my own earth. One of the Mormon prophets, Lorenzo Snow, explained the Mormon beliefs this way, saying, "As man is, God once was. As God is, man may become." I was talking with some Mormon missionaries just 2 weeks ago. And one of the points I brought out is a good thing to share. One of the reasons that we have a difference is Mormonism is not just another denomination. It actually is a different worldview. Once you say gods and goddesses, once you say becoming a god, once your scripture says in the beginning the gods created the heavens and the earth, then what that does is it puts you in a different family of religions called polytheism. And you could even argue that Islam, in some degree, is closer to Christianity than Mormonism. But I want to deal with this fourth worldview, which is pantheism. And again, you have the word theos, which is God. Now, this is a little more difficult for us to understand in the Western mind. But the prefix pan means all or everything. So pantheism is a worldview that teaches that God is everything and everything is God. I am God, but you're God too. And the chair you're sitting in is ultimately God. God is everything and everything is God. What's the buttons on that? God, they would say, is eternal, so we have that in common. But a pantheist would also say God is impersonal. And here's how you'll hear it sometimes. They'll talk about God, not he. God is an it, a power, a force, a principle, a concept. An it, not a he. God is impersonal. A matter is an illusion. Maya is the Sanskrit word for this. Everything seems to be different, but ultimately all is one. This is called monism, and the one is identified as God. That is pantheism. Humanity, well, if all is God, then humans are equal to God. You're God, but you just don't know you're God. You're God with amnesia. So what you need is an experience, and that's the fourth button, which is salvation, an enlightenment experience to help you realize the deity that is in all things. Some religions that fall in that category, Hinduism would be an example. Taoism would be another example. You may have seen the symbol that looks the circle with the squiggly line, what's called the yin and yang. This is the Taoist concept that all is one, monism, but the one is divided into opposites. Black, white, positive, negative, male, female, yin, yang. And peace, harmony, and awareness is found in balancing or harmonizing the two polar opposites. So you have Taoism. A third example would be New Age spirituality. Now, New Age, the phrase is kind of coming out of vogue, but the New Age beliefs are very much mainstreamed in our culture today. This has basically become the religion of Oprah Winfrey. I've been praying for Oprah Winfrey for many years. I hope you do the same. You know, Oprah was raised Baptist. Did you know that? And I often wonder what impact she could have for the kingdom if she was to return to the God of her youth. But she has gone a different direction, New Age spirituality. I wrote a book a couple of years ago, co-authored a book on something called The Secret. And The Secret is highly touted and promoted by Oprah on a number of different programs. And the idea was that you can create your own reality with the power of your mind. If you think the right thoughts, you can be rich, or you can think checks in your mailbox, or you can even control your weight. There's a secret diet. I don't have time to tell you that. Maybe next time. But bottom line is you can use the power of your mind to create your own perfect reality. Well, that goes back to the idea of who you really are. You're really God. You just don't know you're God. Well, The Secret, very popular. I was in Los Angeles kind of promoting the book and speaking some. And on the way back to Dallas, I fly so much I get a lot of free upgrades. So I was upgraded to first class, and a guy sitting next to me, and I was kind of reading, and he started a conversation with me. And you asked me what I was. Well, he said, well, what do you do? And that's hard for me to explain. I'm thinking, you want the red pill or the green pill? But I kind of explained what I did, and I said specifically, though, I'm out promoting a book that I've co-authored. And he said, oh, I've written a book too. In fact, I've co-authored it with Oprah Winfrey. And I'm on my way to do the Oprah Winfrey show. Now, I should have recognized the guy. It's my job to know this, but I didn't recognize him until he said that. That's Bob Green, the personal trainer of Oprah Winfrey, in the seat next to me. Of how many airplanes and how many flights and how many seats? How many believe it was only a coincidence? I've been praying for Oprah, and here's her personal assistant next to me, her trainer next to me, on his way to do the Oprah Winfrey show. I said, well, there's a chapter in my book about Oprah. He said, well, what does it say? And we start talking about that. And then I said, he says to me, after a moment of reflection, he says, but James, don't you believe there has to be something greater than us out there? It would have to be hugely powerful. It would have to be. And I said, I think you're on the right track. And I just didn't say anything. Now, why didn't I say anything? Because I knew it was a 3.5-hour flight. I had plenty of time. He's not getting off that plane. So I just went back to reading. I just waited. And sure enough, a few minutes later, he said, well, but you didn't tell me what you believe. What do you mean I'm on the right track? I said, well, you want to talk about that? Oh, yeah. And I said, you said that God was an it. Now, what if I have identified his worldview as? An it, not a he. He's pantheist. So I asked him, I said, do you believe that, let me ask you, which is more powerful? You said God was it. Which is greater, a rock or a dog? He said, well, a dog's alive. A dog would be greater than a rock. I said, I would agree. Which is superior or greater? A human being, a person, or a dog? He said, a person. I said, well, let me ask you, wouldn't you think that this great, you called it a great power or force, wouldn't it have to be at least personal, at least where we are with personality and being able to self-identify? He said, I never thought about it that way. We had a fantastic conversation about who God could be, and I was able to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't know that he ever gave the book to Oprah. I never got a call from Oprah or her attorneys, so I'm assuming that maybe he didn't. But again, if you'll lift up your eyes and look out, the fields are white to harvest, and we will have opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, what I want to do is I want to encourage you to interact, to walk across that room, to engage with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It has the power to change our world and to save souls. Just as much power today as there was 2,000 years ago when Jesus Christ turned the world upside down with just 12 guys. 11, one was bad, 11 guys, and changed the world with the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now I'm going to share this message, talk with Dr. Bunce about this, and we want to come back between after Easter, before Mother's Day, and just hit the state of New Mexico as hard as we can to engage your churches, your people, to know how to use the 4 worldviews to start a gospel conversation. If you're interested, please contact Rick Sullivan or Cheryl at the evangelism office, and we'd love to put that on the calendar and try to make that possible. We want to get as many churches as we possibly can. This is through our partnership with New Mexican Baptist. I want to also encourage you to consider our workshop. I'm going to be talking about Islam, a Christian perspective, and I'm going to be sharing what every Christian must know about Islam today. Let's pray together. Father, we want to thank you for the power of the gospel. Help us to be salt and light. Help us to not be silent just because it might be socially awkward. Help us, Lord, to be able to interact, to engage with our culture. Help us to earnestly contend for the faith while speaking the truth in love. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.